Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to this luncheon. My name is James Pomfret. I'm a correspondent governor, or former correspondent governor of the FCC, and I'm a chief correspondent for Reuters. Today's speaker is Professor Sonny Lo. He'll be very familiar to many of you in the audience, a veteran observer of Hong Kong and Chinese politics, who has done some groundbreaking research on this topic, the United Front work, China's United Front work in Hong Kong. Sonny has published 11 single-authored books on topics such as the politics of Hong Kong and Macau and cross-border crime and policing in Greater China. His collaborators on this new research, which will actually be on sale at the counter over there afterwards, are Stephen Hung. Stephen's down there in the audience. He's a former district council member for over a decade and very, very well sourced at the ground level in Hong Kong politics, and a former urban councillor for 5 years. And we also have Mr. Jeff Liu, who has been, who's doing postgraduate studies now in China Studies at City University. And he's been getting a lot of on-the-ground research for this as well on this topic. So the speaker today, the speakers today, Sonny will be the focus, but they will all be available for a Q&A afterwards. They'll share the findings of some excellent new research on just exactly how China is deepening and intensifying its United Front push in Hong Kong since in the past few years, particularly after some of the upheavals that we've seen in local politics, Occupy Central, etc. And this topic, as you all know, it was once quite a fringe issue, but it's very much now in the public spotlight. Countries like Australia and the US have been looking more and reacting more proactively to China's long arm extending overseas. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Sonny. Thank you.
Thank you, James, for inviting us to present our findings. Now, first of all, we have to understand the objectives of China's new United Front in Hong Kong since 2013. Why 2013? Because in November 2013, the central government set up the National Security Commission, and this was really a turning point. Objective number one is to win the hearts and minds of more Hong Kong people than ever before. And secondly, supporting the central government's various policies towards Hong Kong. Number three, enhancing patriotism and the Chinese national and political cultural identity of Hong Kong people. Fourth, achieve Beijing's comprehensive jurisdiction over Hong Kong. Fifth, isolating and defeating political enemies and opposition. Sixth, strengthen a coalition of patriotic elites governing Hong Kong. And finally, protect the supremacy and interests of one country, especially its national security. Now, historically speaking, we have to understand that from 1997 to 2003, United Front work was maintained, but there was no breakthrough in Hong Kong. In 2008, there was a very influential article by a researcher in the liaison office, and he argued for the need for two governing forces, the Hong Kong SAR government and the mainland cadre team sent to Hong Kong. And then, of course, in 2013, January, the idea of Occupy Central movement emerged. And as I mentioned earlier, in November, the National Security Commission was set up in China. And actually, this was a crucial turning point in strengthening China's United Front work in Hong Kong. In June 2014, the white paper on Hong Kong mentioning Beijing's comprehensive jurisdiction was published. and then followed by September to December 2014, the Occupy Central Movement. After that, in July 2015, a leading small group on United Front was set up in Beijing. And most importantly, in September 2015, Beijing revised the United Front regulations to consolidate its work on Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, and the overseas Chinese. And then early 2016, there was the Mong Kok riot. And last year, President Xi Jinping came to Hong Kong and he emphasized Beijing's exercise of the comprehensive jurisdiction. Now, what are the key actors in United Front work? Well, there are several levels here. At the Beijing level, number one, there's the leading small group. And secondly, there's a United Front department. And thirdly, there's a Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. And fourthly, the Hong Kong-Macau Study Association. And at the provincial level in China, all the United Front departments of all these provinces have interactions with the interest groups in Hong Kong, as we can see almost on a daily basis. At the territorial level in Hong Kong, the liaison office has three major departments dealing with United Front from what we study. Social liaison department, coordination department, and social work departments. And at the district level, there are some important actors dealing with United Front work. The first one is the pro-Beijing Party, the Democratic Alliance for Betterment of Hong Kong. The second one is the clan groups, lots of clan groups in Hong Kong, Fujianese groups, Cantonese groups. And thirdly, trade unions, led by the Federation of Trade Unions. And then fourthly, women groups. Fifthly, youth groups, and of course, religious groups, and most importantly, other district level groups, especially the Kaifong or neighborhood associations. For those who are familiar with Hong Kong, Kaifong associations, neighborhood associations were set up by the British in the 1980s. But now, if you take a look at most of the activities, they are all under the United Front umbrella. What are the strategies of China's new United Front work? Well, the breadth and depth have been deepening. Number one, full mobilization of pro-Beijing groups to support not only the Hong Kong government policies, but also the NPC interpretations of the Basic Law. Secondly, the use of the Big Bay Area Plan as a magnet to attract the business and professional groups to integrate with the mainland and also create new front groups. Actually, some new front groups have already been created these 2 weeks. Number three, new focus on the work of youth, ethnic minorities, women, and scientists. Fourth, intensive contacts and daily gatherings with front group leaders and members. Fifth, reactivate all those pro-Beijing groups that were previously inactive. Number five is quite prominent in these 2 months. Probably they are preparing for the district council elections next year. Number six, as I mentioned earlier, absorb most neighborhood associations at the district level. Number seven, cross-border mobilization of individual Hong Kong people to vote in Hong Kong elections, and even the creation of a few front groups. 7 days ago, I was amazed that there was a pro-Beijing group created in Shenzhen, and the Fujian officials went to Shenzhen to attend this inaugural ceremony. Number eight, extensive coordination and full mobilization of all the front groups in elections, including number one, voters registration, which is very important. Number two, campaigns, and finally, voting. Now, what are the characteristics of the United Front groups? Number one, they use livelihood issues to appeal to ordinary people, many of whom may not know that they are really under the United Front influence. Number two, cross-class and multiple professions. Number three, clear division of labor by focusing on particular profession and sector. Number four, in each sector, core groups reach out to other peripheral groups. And number five, at least there are 2 levels of interactions. Larger groups have higher level interactions with the core front groups in China, while the smaller groups interact at the district level with the pro-Beijing political party, trade unions, and 3 large front organizations. Number one, the Hong Kong Island Federation of Associations. Number two, the Kowloon Federation of Associations. And number three, the New Territories Federation of Associations. And finally, tremendous amount of money has been spent on the organization, coordination, and mobilization of all these groups. If you take a look at the DAB performance in the direct election results of the Legislative Council, actually, the pro-establishment groups if you take a look at the right-hand column, 2016, the pro-establishment groups, they got 41.7% of the votes, but actually the DAB didn't do very well. The DAB only got 16.4% of the votes, right, out of this 41% of the votes in the pro-establishment camp. So what's the implication, ladies and gentlemen? The United Front focuses not only on the DAB, but also on the middle sectors, which are really the target of penetration. So DAB performance, as I mentioned earlier, the DAB alone has not been really so impressive in the 2016 electoral direct elections, getting only 16.4% of the votes out of 41.7% of the pro-establishment votes. It means that the pro-Beijing coalition is still very important in China's United Front work, electorally speaking. As Wang Yang, the chair of the CPPCC, said on June 4, 2018 in a CPPCC meeting, I quote, "In United Front work, Beijing has to unite positive strength, strive for neutral strength, and transform negative strength," end of quote. And this is especially important in Hong Kong. You may recall the late Xu Jiatuan's memoir. He also said that in United Front work, Beijing has to reach out to the middle sectors. Number 4, DAB's strength actually lies in its better and stronger performance in district council elections. And here, ladies and gentlemen, you can take a look at the DAB performance in district council elections in 2015 only, on the right-hand column. Right? They nominated 171 candidates. They had 119 elected candidates, and the percentage of the votes, 21.1%. If you take a look at the pro-Beijing forces, overall, right-hand side, right-hand corner at the bottom, overall, the pro-Beijing votes, 53.7% of the vote. Ladies and gentlemen, they did very well overall, but the DAB was only getting 21%. So what is the role of the clan groups in United Front? So actually, they are the transmission belts in United Front work. Transmission belts, as you know, if you study Soviet politics, they were very crucial in communist style of politics. A very good example is the Fujianese interest groups. Traditionally and historically speaking, they have been very politically loyal to Beijing, and they are now increasingly powerful and influential, having 66 members in the 1,200-member Chief Executive Election Committee in 2017. And 11 of the 36 Hong Kong NPC members come from the Fujianese communities. And for those friends who live in North Point, the Fujianese candidates in district council elections are very strong, quite often uncontested. And the patriotic Fujianese group have close relations with the DAB, and they are one of the pillars of the clan groups supportive of China's United Front. For the FTU, the Pro-Beijing Federation of Trade Unions, there are several characteristics. Number 1, they have fierce competition with the Pro-Democracy Confederation of Trade Unions, illustrating bitter inter-union rivalry. And secondly, before July 1st, 1997, the FTU relied on social movement to fight for the working class interests. But after 1997, their political orientation has changed to emphasize dialogue between the government, employers, and employees. So in short, the FTU has become more pro-government than before, but as a United Front group, the FTU is still focusing on the working class, and it is performing better in both electoral and district council elections. So here in this table, you can take a look at 2016, again, right-hand column. The FTU alone, they nominated a number of candidates, and they had 3 candidates elected, whereas the CTU only had 1 candidate elected in the last electoral elections. Now, for the district council elections, the FTU is actually acting like a political party. In 2015, they nominated 48 candidates, with 29 of them elected, so pretty strong at the district level. How about women groups and youth groups? Women groups are under United Front are spreading very quickly, but it is unclear and doubtful whether many women understand that they are under United Front umbrella. And secondly, there are some core women groups notably the All China Federation of Women Hong Kong Delegates Association and Hong Kong Women Development Association. Now, in the youth sector, there are also some core groups like the CPPCC, Youth Members Association, and number two, the Y Elite Association, a new association focusing on the young professional, and thirdly, the Hong Kong United Youth Associations. But the youth sector is politically divided. There are many localist youth groups resistant to United Front, and they hold post-materialist values, to use the term by Professor Ronald Inglehart, such as human rights, rule of law, democracy, and sustainable development. Here in this diagram, you can take a look at the pro-Beijing women groups. At the center, there is the All China Women Federation, and there are some other groups reaching out, like the district level women groups and non-governmental groups. And outside these circles, you can see some pro-democracy feminist groups resisting and confronting United Front work. But there are very few pro-democracy feminist groups. Now, if you take a look at the youth groups, as I mentioned earlier, at the center, they also have the Youth Federation, All China Youth Federation at the core, reaching out to the three major core groups in Hong Kong, and then they reach out to the district level pro-Beijing youth groups, including most recently the uniform cadet groups, right? And then there are also other non-governmental groups at the periphery. Interestingly, in the youth sector, there are many localist youth groups resisting United Front. Many of them are small, not really large enough. So can United Front win the hearts and minds of the Hong Kong people? Well, electorally speaking, pro-Beijing votes in the district council direct elections could be maintained from 54.7% in 1999 to 54.6% in 2015, contrasting with only 40% of the pro-democracy votes in 1999 and the same 40% in 2015. So ladies and gentlemen, actually the pro-Beijing United Front work is working quite well at the district council direct elections, almost 55% of the vote. So strong United Front work at the district level is maintained. Now at the electoral level, United Front work is less successful. The pro-Beijing forces increased their votes from 31% in 1998 to 41% in 2016, compared with the pro-democracy votes from 63% in 1998 to 54% in 2016. So here, after 1997, we could see 10% increase in pro-Beijing votes in the direct election of LegCo. Hence, the pro-Beijing forces overall have won the hearts and minds of more voters from 1998 to 2016. So here again in this table on the right-hand column, you can see that the pro-Beijing votes garner 54.6%, whereas the pro-democracy votes are 40%. In the direct election here, on the left-hand side, the left-hand column, the pro-Beijing forces, right? So if you take a look at the votes gained, the percentage in 1998, only 31%, but now in 2016, 41% of the votes. So 10% of the vote increase. And in terms of the number of votes, actually double, right? 456,000 to 887,000. So they did pretty well, actually, but not so well as to capture more seats. Now, can the pro-democracy forces resist United Front? Well, there are several points here. Since 1997, pro-democracy forces have been increasingly fragmented, divided, and disunited. And this led to the success of United Front in co-opting some Democrats. And thirdly, the Big Bay Area plan can also make some Democrats pragmatic. And number four, the Democrats have failed to convince the voters how livelihood issues can be linked up with democracy, unlike the pro-Beijing forces that can use livelihood issues as a means to gain more votes politically. And of course, the localists are now in decline, and so we can anticipate that if the 2012 LegCo direct election saw the rise of left-wing Democrats, and if the 2016 LegCo direct election saw the rise of radical localists, then we can anticipate that in the 2020 LegCo direct election, it would likely favor the moderate Democrats, not the radical ones. What are the scenarios of United Front development? Here we list the 3 major scenarios. Number 1, it continues to deepen and broaden, especially in view of the important discussion around 2030s over the arrangement of Hong Kong development after 2047, when the Basic Law would likely continue for some years. So we anticipate that there will be a huge battle over Hong Kong about what will happen to Hong Kong after 2047. And number 2, United Front work would be more difficult under several circumstances. If the economy of Hong Kong suddenly fluctuates and takes a turn for the worse. And ladies and gentlemen, now the economy seems to be very good, but if there is any sudden economic decline, the localists may come out and protest, and there could be more problems because the youth discontent has not been really effectively solved after the Occupy Central. Number 2, China's political development would suddenly become turbulent. And thirdly, there will be a silent political resurgence of the radical localists in Hong Kong, not in the short run, but in the longer term. We don't anticipate a sudden resurgence in the short run, but in the long run, there may be a kind of resurgence. And thirdly, United Front work cannot go deeper and broader into the society of Hong Kong because the post-materialist values of many people remain strong and resistant. So what is the conclusion? Well, before we come to the conclusion, if you are interested in our research here, you can contact Stephen and Jeff later, and there are many copies on the table. Now, in conclusion, China under President Xi Jinping is witnessing a renewal, reactivation, and rejuvenation of its United Front work in Hong Kong. And secondly, United Front work on Hong Kong demonstrates the hallmark of communist-style politics, namely penetrative politics. Penetrative politics is characterized by, number 1, the use of more core groups to reach out to the peripheral groups in the society, and secondly, the use of livelihood issues as a disguise to win the political and electoral support of voters. In other words, United Front in Hong Kong has become more open, more visible, more prominent than ever before. Yet, the resistance to China's United Front work remains strong because Hong Kong basically has 2 political societies, one which is politically loyal to Beijing, and the other which is very post-materialistic. As such, we can anticipate that political struggle, battles, and conflicts will persist and perhaps even worsen in the coming decades leading to 2047 and beyond. So that's my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonny. But before I open it up to the floor for the Q&A, I'd just like to kick off with the first question. Sonny, you've obviously done a lot of research through the years on this topic. You've written a book about it, and it's not an easy field of research because a lot of these activities are secretive, and so just in terms of giving the bigger picture, what the United Front has been doing in Hong Kong, to some extent, elements of that have been sort of radiated further afield to other countries. And, you say that Hong Kong hasn't been a particularly successful place for them. Yet, if they didn't do this work, the elections presumably would have been a lot worse against the pro-establishment forces. So could you just maybe talk a little bit about, the Hong Kong experience, and then how, some of the elements may have been used by Beijing to project even further, beyond Hong Kong, the region?
For the wider implications for Asia and other countries, well, there are several indicators in United Front work. Number 1, we have to study the groups involved in possible United Front work. But here we have to be very careful. Not all the interest groups are working under the United Front umbrella. It took us some time to identify who are the core groups, who are the peripheral groups, because we have to understand their activities by digging out their newsletters, by possibly participating in the activities, by observing whether Chinese officials here and there may attend, by observing how money and donations come into such groups. So this is indicator number one. Indicator number two is the, as I mentioned in this presentation, the autonomous nature of the voters. In some overseas Chinese community, I'm quite familiar with Toronto because I lived there for many years. Say in the case of Toronto, we saw the Ontario provincial election several months ago, and there were some very few mainland Chinese candidates, but they were actually integrated into the Canadian society. So I think the second important indicator is the autonomous nature of your voters in your country, who may not really vote for those candidates supported by quote-unquote United Front groups. And of course, the third indicator is the background of the candidates. As I mentioned you earlier, one Fujianese-born candidate ran in the Ontario provincial election. He won. He did it very well. I didn't find any evidence of close linkages with United Front. So, but I think Canadian overseas Chinese are very different from, say, Australian, because the Canadian overseas Chinese belong to the third generation. The first generation actually could be traced back to the situation after 66, 67 Cultural Revolution. Second generation, Taiwan. Third generation, mainland Chinese. Australia, now they face more mainland Chinese than ever before. So the degree of integration of the overseas Chinese in that community can be another indicator. So we have to work out all these indicators to study the implications.
Okay, so please identify yourself.
Hi, Shirley Lin from Chinese University of Hong Kong. Thank you, Sonny, for a wonderful presentation. I'm very intrigued, and I also agree with your conclusion that the key work, the key objective for the United Front now has to be young people. And the Hong Kong young people are suffering greatly. My question is, you gave a very good macro analysis of the effort, the data on linkage to electoral results and assessment, but we didn't get a real sense of how it's done. And you talked about money transfer and things that are clandestine, but how is the United Front trying to now sort of increase their market share with youth groups in terms of incentives, given that they know they are resistant? And when you say resistant, I get a picture of youth groups that have nothing to do with them, that are coming into contact and getting checks. Is that the right description? What does it mean they're resistant? They have activities, and what is Beijing's list of youth groups under the United Front same as your group list, or your list is bigger than theirs?
Okay, yeah. Shelly, thank you for your question. Let me answer a question first, and then maybe Jeff, you can follow up. Jeff is taking out all the Facebook and the internet of the localist groups every day, in this several months, on every weekends, we spend days and nights to take out everything. We spend lots of time, To answer your question, I think how is United Front work conducted? Actually, I can give you my old book chapter on the 1999 District Council elections. We found out how the liaison office in Hong Kong orchestrated the election, because we went out to interview extensively the local candidates. And some local candidates 20 years ago, they were very open. Actually, in that research, I even interviewed my collaborator, Stephen Hong, who at that time was a local district councillor. The technique of United Front strategy, I think I mentioned here already. This is really new, this slide. So all the strategies are done in a top-down manner. And that's number one. And number two, the strategies that they use core groups. The core groups reach out to the peripheral groups. And then now it's non-election time, but actually it's a kind of election campaigning. Because it's an election campaigning in the sense that every day they have all sorts of activities. Okay, so whenever elections occur, first of all, they mobilize the voters to register. This is the reason why the pro-Beijing forces have so-called iron votes. 铁票, 鐵票, and then campaign full mobilization, very nice coordination, amazing. Many years ago, back in 1993, I followed a former DAB candidate. He showed me a full list, actually 20 years ago already. He showed me a computerized list of all the voters with the address, with the phone number. Now, I think it's even more sophisticated. So for the market share of the localists, I think the localists, the young people, they are very resistant to all this United Front work. If you take a look at the localist websites, there are two communities in Hong Kong. One very pro-Beijing every day. They go to attend all these gatherings. The other one, they don't care. And that is the reason why the youth, the inroads into the youth sector is very limited. And Jeff, do you want to say anything? Huh? Yeah? Okay, yeah.
And actually, the localists, we can categorize maybe three to four major types. First is the critical Marxists, who concern the income redistribution, and some of them is the separatists. For example, Bao Jiu Leung and Yao Weiqing, the Youngspiration, and and then some of them is the independentists. For example, the Hong Kong, the group called Hong Kong Indigenous and Hong Kong Independent Party, and also they have the self-determinists, for example, the Demosisto. And these groups, they have different ideology, and some of them will see China as a threat, and some of them will see China as China try to recolonize Hong Kong, and some of them see China as a threat to the Hong Kong's the income redistribution, something like that. Okay. And so they will resist and confront to the youth group. They will see those youth groups who politically support Beijing as a puppet, Beijing's puppet. Yeah.
Yeah, just going from left to right. Yep.
I'm To Han Shi, a freelance journalist. Are you able to share with us, if you have the information, to what extent has the United Front penetrated, newspapers, television, journalists, editors, as well as the film industry, influencing newspapers to be more pro-Beijing or encouraging Hong Kong movies to be more patriotic to Beijing?
Well, thank you for the question. We don't have the focus on the media sector. Yeah. That is possibly one of the gaps in our forthcoming book. But from our research, the penetration in the media takes place at the top level, the media proprietors. That's definite. For the editors and reporters, we don't have the interviews with the reporters and the editors. But having said that, in the media circle, I think after 1997, you can see that actually perhaps there's a process of mainlandization of the mass media in Hong Kong, meaning that the media control under proprietors who have a close relationship with mainland China, this phenomenon is quite prominent. It's quite prominent. At the editorial level, reporters level, I think you have to talk to our local Hong Kong friends, and they are more familiar with us.
Yeah. In the corner.
Hi, Sonny. Good to hear you. Again, this is Zach Coleman from Nikkei. Wanted to ask you, you mentioned how the DAB is sort of declining as a tool for United Front to reach, especially the middle class, but as a political force for LegCo and things. So I want to ask you, instead of the DAB, are we talking about the new party or the Liberals, or who is the primary vehicle now for the United Front in LegCo elections?
Yeah. Well, I think although the DAB performance has not been so impressive, but still I think it is the most important vehicle of United Front at the LegCo level. But as I mentioned earlier, the middle sectors are becoming more and more important. The New People Party, right, and also other pro-Beijing independent candidates and groups. So as the late Xu Jiatun in his memoir mentioned, United Front work has to reach out to the middle sector. And after Xi Jinping left Hong Kong, he was criticized for ignoring the working class in Hong Kong. And so after 1997, you can see the FTU is reaching out to the working class. Now for the DAB, if you analyze the DAB very carefully, in the past, they focused on the middle class, but now they are actually focused on not only the middle class, but also the middle upper class, co-opting some of the small business people, and also reaching out a little bit to the working class. Now in the Hong Kong elections, what is most interesting is the alliance between the DAB and the FTU. They are working hand in hand, as we can see, from some of these tables. Actually, here, the FTU participation. Ladies and gentlemen, you can take a look at this table. The FTU and DAB had an alliance, but in the recent years, in the electoral direct election, there was no alliance. So what is the implication? The implication is that the FTU alone went out to grasp and focus on the working class votes. So that is the reason why I mentioned that there is now a clear division of labor in the pro-Beijing forces, very clear. In the past, the DAB was not strong enough, the FTU was not strong enough, so they form an alliance. Now they have clear division of labor. So in short, still the DAB is an influential force.
Venus?
Hi. Hello. Hi, I'm Venus. I'm also with Reuters. I'm just curious if you've seen any difference in the way the United Front works following how their work has been exposed, quote unquote, in some countries like Australia, Canada, where there's been, or even the United States, where I think their activities were not really made aware by the public before, but in recent months and years, we are seeing more and more media reports on them. How has that affected their work in general? And also another question on the Greater Bay Area. In Hong Kong right now, we see the United Front basically penetrating and influencing, for example, groups that are already in existence. But do you think they will have a say in how the Greater Bay Area and its related policies might be formulated?
Yeah. Two questions here. Number one, I think in the United States, overseas Chinese in the United States are like those in Canada. They are more integrated into the mainstream American society. So even if United Front work is conducted to win the hearts and minds of the voters in America, it is quite difficult, just like the Canadian case. Australia, as I mentioned earlier, is easier because of the first generation of immigration from China. So even though there may be some United Front activities, I don't think that it can really influence American politics at all, just like the Canadian politics. I think the Australian case, the Bennelong by-election was very special because of the one-seat margin at that moment. I don't think that it can be repeated easily in other places. For your second question is on, the Greater Bay Area. Now, Greater Bay Area is now focusing on the professionals, business people, and in these several weeks, I have observed that new groups, business groups, occupational groups, focusing on the Big Bay Area have been created. That's number one. And number two, the Big Bay Area is spreading out to all the occupational sectors in Hong Kong, Macau. I think, of course, the chief executive is going to meet, Han Zheng, soon on the Big Bay Area plan. I think there are deeper implications in the Big Bay Area plan, not only focusing on United Front work, focusing on Hong Kong alone, but also Taiwan in the long run. The Chinese government has already, issued 31 policy packages to attract and lure the Taiwan people to work in mainland China. So in the long run, if Taiwan's political situation shifts to a more pro-mainland or pro-KMT orientation, we can anticipate that the Big Bay Area may be expanded to embrace Taiwan as well. Of course, for the young people in Hong Kong, for the middle class in Hong Kong, they may be quite resistant to the Big Bay Area plan because the Hong Kong government tries to appeal to some people to migrate and live in the Big Bay Area. Now, to what extent the Hong Kong people accept this idea, we still do not know. But for the middle lower classes, if you ask them to live in the Big Bay Area, well, can they afford, to live there financially? Will transportation be so convenient? Will healthcare be so affordable in the Big Bay Area? So there are a whole range of issues to be resolved. But I think the Big Bay Area is interesting because it uses, the central government in Beijing uses economic integration to strengthen the national identity of Hong Kong people, which I think Jeff and Stephen would agree with me, which will be quite resisted by many young people in Hong Kong. I have questions there, James.
Yes. Was there a hand raised there? Yep.
David Roberts, Associate Board Governor at FCC. I've been in Hong Kong 31 years, and the winners in Hong Kong for me over the years have been the families in property development and big business. Now, we live in a society where young people definitely can't afford to even buy an apartment, even both of them are professionals. So, in terms of United Front, how do you deal with the dichotomy of the traditional big business coziness with Beijing versus the absolute necessities of young people trying to forge a life and create a family?
Yeah. Thank you, David, for your question. As the late Xu Jiatun said, there is always a contradiction of China's United Front work in Hong Kong, dealing with the business people and how to deal with the working class people. I think the big business people, they are easier targets of United Front, no doubt about that. But for the young people, the youth discontent has not been really tackled effectively in these several years. Number one, social immobility. Number two, housing. Number three, the employment prospects. So as long as these three issues are not tackled, and if Hong Kong's economy is suffering a sudden decline, I'm afraid that there may be another Mong Kok unrest, and that kind of unrest may be even larger and unexpected. So that's the danger, especially in view of the fact that the property prices in Hong Kong they are so high. So there is a danger there.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm Harry Harding of the University of Virginia. And I want to get back to the question of the fact that, as you said, in many cases, the targets of the United Front campaign are not aware of where that United Front campaign is coming from. And my question is, how is Beijing, the Chinese Communist Party, the liaison office, how are they able to maintain this cloak of invisibility around the sponsorship and leadership of the campaign? Because the world is increasingly transparent. It's increasingly difficult to keep that kind of a secret. It would be fairly easy to expose it, as indeed you're doing here today. But then the second and deeper question is, supposing they did know, would they really care? Would that in any way delegitimize the United Front campaign? Or would it, again, in an open and at least quasi-democratic society, simply be seen as a perfectly normal and acceptable part of coalition building in a complex political environment?
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Harding. Yeah, I read your book on China many years ago. Eventually we met in Hong Kong. Now, the United Front groups in Hong Kong, I think, yes, many of them may not know that they are under the UF umbrella, United Front umbrella, but I don't think the Chinese officials care too much about it, because as long as the objective is to help the pro-Beijing coalition to win more votes, to defeat the political opposition, to stop the Democrats from grasping more votes in the legislative council and district councils. This ultimate objective is the most important one. So the ends justify the means. Secondly, yes, there may be many people, especially women groups, they may not care about all this United Front work. But I think Hong Kong people are quite pragmatic. As long as United Front work can deliver various sorts of constituency services to all these women, men, or elderly people, like free haircut services, free legal aid, free lychee tour to China, well, that benefit a lot. Or free snake soup dinner, so they are happy with that. So from this pragmatic, utilitarian orientation of the Hong Kong voters, United Front work is still working well. For whether the CCP wants to be transparent, definitely no. The Hong Kong Basic Law says nothing about political party. The political parties in Hong Kong, we don't even have a political party law. Political parties in Hong Kong are registered under the company ordinance. So the authorities, they see political parties as something ambiguous and special. So they all want to keep it ambiguous. And there was a talk about political party legislation in Hong Kong. And ironically, the pro-Beijing side and also the pro-democracy side also opposed. So keep the status quo, keep everything ambiguous. That serves the United Front objective.
Yes.
Tony Watson, Hong Kong Society of Financial Analysts. To what extent has the United Front been successful in penetrating local professional bodies, number one? Number two, to what extent are you seeing overseas governments pushing back against United Front activities? I note recently there was I believe a Guangdong clan association gathering in Vancouver where several delegates were barred by the Canadian government from entering.
Yes. To what extent United Front work penetrates professional associations? Now, there's a very good indicator to analyze that. The indicator is the electoral functional constituency elections in the past 20 years. The United Front work has been penetrating quite well into the professional sector because in the electoral functional constituencies, most of the electoral members, they are pro-Beijing, pro-government. And if you take a look at how they nominate candidates, how they make coordination, the answer is that very, very, very deep. The professional, if you recall, is one of the 4 sectors of the Chief Executive Election Committee. Secondly, for the clan groups in going to Canada, I don't know about it, but as I mentioned earlier, as we found out, the clan groups in Hong Kong, they are now under the close umbrella of United Front work, because what is important about the clan groups is that they are very attaching great importance to their networks, guanxi, and also once they mobilize their guanxi from all their clan members, it constitutes the power base for election. So I think for the clan groups in Canada, it takes time for us to study further, but definitely in the case of Hong Kong, very, very deep. Or sometimes some of the clan groups which were inactive for many years, now they are suddenly active. What is the purpose? Election.
Sorry, I think my question was more about overseas governments pushing back against United Front activities on their shores.
It depends on the laws of the overseas countries. It depends on whether these clan groups may really violate the domestic law of this country's concern. If they are not violating the law, then no problem. But if they are violating, say, the donation law, the election law in that country, that may be quite tricky. So there is a fine line.
Ying.
Thank you. Ying Chen from University of Hong Kong. Thank you for the presentation. The examples of US and Australia and Canada were raised. But Hong Kong is very different from those in that our economy is very integrated with China's economy, and more so. So then with the integration of the economy, with exchanges, you would have more exchanges at the professional level, at the social level. Right? So I have no question that this is a great presentation with United Front work at work. My question is that how do you differentiate between United Front work, United Front activities, and more, may I call it, organic integration, collaborations, exchanges between different sectors in Hong Kong and mainland forces? We cannot label every exchanges as kind of orchestrated by United Front work. Right? So how do you differentiate that?
Yeah. Now, the differentiation is not difficult at all. I adopt the, Cold War, methodology of studying politics in the former Soviet Union and Communist China by reading all the editorials and commentaries of all these pro-Beijing or mainland media almost every day. The technique is that for those organic relationship between the professional groups and China, you can tell in their activities, they just focus on the professional issues alone, without the involvement of Chinese officials, without pronouncement about whether they should go back to Hong Kong or they should vote in elections. So to answer your question, we have to analyze the activities of all the groups. And that's number one. And number two, we have to listen to what the group leaders and even the group members say in those activities. We can do that. We can separate that.
Can I follow up just quickly? Just give you an example. Yesterday, the law school at University of Hong Kong launched their 50th anniversary celebration. And I watched it on video. It was very interesting. On the stage, you have Yash Gai, you have Johannes Chen, you have Albert, former deans. And then you also have the head or leading officials of the China Liaison Office. There were like 20 people on stage. I thought it was quite historic and interesting. They were both on stage, right? So is it organic collaboration? Or is it United Front work? And we know that Hong Kong U Law School and it's very active in defending rights. So how do we look at that? One of these examples happen every day.
Yeah. In this case, I would say just social gathering, at most organic, definitely not United Front work, because there are several indicators for us to study all these groups. Number one, if you take a look at our research package, number one, whether the Chinese officials attend, as you mentioned. And number two, what do they say? And number three, what are the background of these groups? And number four, whether there is any linkage between the group leaders and the Chinese officials or even the Chinese groups. And finally, we take a look even at the financial background of some of the groups, which is very difficult for us to analyze because some of the groups never tell us openly their financial situation. So there are a number of indicators.
Okay, I think we have to wrap it up now, unfortunately, but I'm sure Sonny will be available afterwards if you want to grab him for a quick chat, and Jeff and Stephen as well. So, thank you very much to our distinguished guests today, and Professor Sonny Lo, Stephen Hung, and Jeff Loon, and for sharing their deep insights on this topic of vital relevance, not just for Hong Kong, but to governments around the region and beyond. So, as according to our club tradition,
thank you.
Is umbrella.
Thank you. Nice umbrella, blue color. I'll give it to Jeff. Young guy. Thank you. Thank you.
It should be yellow, though, yeah?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Here we go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.